Hey guys, you probably learned a lot from my old video on easy way to color manga, but it's time for an update. I have learned so many new tricks and ways to color manga so much faster while still maintaining a high quality and epic special effects. So in today's video, you're gonna learn everything behind my manga coloring technique. We'll use this gorgeous and clean panel from One Piece chapter 170 during the Alabasta arc, featuring Nico Robin in her iconic Miss All Sunday outfit. Normally, these panels will be very small screenshots, so the quality will be a bit blurry. For these, what I normally do is increase the sharpness of the panel. There might be a couple of pixels around, but these will blend with the coloring, so don't worry too much about them for now. When coloring manga, I always set the page to the blending mode Multiply. This allows the black line art to remain solid, and all the white parts become transparent so that you may color underneath. So my very first step is to set the background into a dark gray color, since this is one of the colors I will less likely use in my coloring. Therefore, I am able to see each and every color I apply and fill in every space, including white. If you don't do this, you tend to forget about coloring eyes and teeth, and other white elements in the panel. I also like to color the text bubbles with white as well, so that I don't accidentally color inside of them. That being said, this text bubble layer must be directly below the line art and above the coloring layers, so that you don't get any color in them. Once you're ready to start coloring, start with the lowest layer for coloring the base. We will for now only color the skin part, so that we can shade only within that part and not get any of the colors mixed together. Using the clipping mask option makes the shading so much easier, since you can use big airbrushes and color only within the base color and not go outside of the lines. It saves you a lot of time. I start normally with a bold shading, using a slightly darker shade than the original base color, going on the edges around the line art, trying to keep it consistent across the coloring. Sometimes you will find in a manga panel some lines that indicate where the shading goes, so you may also use that as a guide. After doing the bold shading, I like to go over with a middle tone to blend the lighter and the darker parts of the shading together, using an airbrush to make it softer and warmer. I typically add a darker shade in the parts where the shading should be stronger. It looks a bit dull for now, so I mixed up a slightly more red tone to warm up the skin a little bit. I also typically add a little blush and lip tint on female characters to make them look a little more lively. I'm not sure why, but Oda used to not draw eyelashes on Robin. I'm actually not sure if he still does that, but I am a big eyelash girl, so I will manually add them to give her a little more feminine look. I also tend to adjust the saturation every time I finish coloring and shading something, since I tend to grab colors that are further on the middle section of the color gradient, but it tends to look a lot duller. So increasing the saturation even for 5% really makes a difference. Now she looks vibrant and warm. For the clothes, I did the exact same steps as with the skin. I separated the elements of the coat and the fur so that I have a cleaner coloring. Even though both are almost white, having a different shading for each makes it look more texturized and vibrant. What do I mean by these? For example, for the coat and the hat part, I went for a beige tone, mixing yellow shading and teal shadings to give it a pop of color, as opposed to sticking with the white base and gray tones. You'll want to avoid using gray as much as possible if you want your colorings to really pop. To create a slight contrast for the fur part of the coat, I went with a light blue shading, so that both parts of the coat have different tones and looks overall more colorful. Again, I kept increasing the saturation after I was done with each part of the coloring. We have not even added the purple and pink colors, and already the coloring looks very vibrant as it is, even though it's supposed to only be beige and white. Now it's time to add a pop of color. Of course, in manga panels we tend to see clothes colored in black, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are black clothes. For example, Luffy's shirt in the manga is usually colored black, but really it's red. Every time we see these, it can mean that the clothes are a darker color, such as dark green, blue, red, or purple. Luckily for this panel, we have the exact anime reference for this outfit. But if you're coloring new characters in future panels that have no references yet, you can go by that rule. This layer must go above the line art or manga panel, since we intend to fill up the black spaces with color. Some people have asked if I erase the inside of the elements so that I can fill in with color, but that seems like an awfully tedious step. I think it's best to draw above so that you can have a cleaner coloring. Then again, we use the clipping mask option to stay within the color base, and then you can start shading the folds and creases of the clothes to define the clothes and give them depth. What I like to do with colors that go above black elements is adding a little bit of texture. There's this feature called halftone that gives this dotted effect like in comic books, so it's perfect for this. However, even at 0%, the effect is too strong. So I like to duplicate the layers so that I can control the opacity of the effect. Remember to apply the alpha lock on said layer, otherwise the halftone effect will be applied to the entire canvas. I will just adjust it to less than 20% opacity, just to give it that subtle dotted effect. Now we can merge the layers so that we can begin to trace the line art once more to complete it. Make sure you draw the line art for each element, like the buttons on the corset, so that it mimics the same line art style as the rest of the panel. Feel free to add extra creases and folds on the clothes to match better. I finished up coloring elements from the skin, and then I will move on to a bonus step. Feel free to skip this part if you feel like it is too much already to start manga coloring. But it's something I have been doing on my colorings lately, and I feel it elevates the coloring so much more. It's a step I explained on my previous video on dramatic shading, where I use a deep blue purple color to add deeper shades. For this, I created a new layer above the entire base coloring, which is why I have been merging all of the layers together for the coloring at this point, except for the layers that go above the black elements as well as the speech bubbles, of course. This way, I can apply the shading style to the skin, the coat, and the hat all at once. I start by applying the blending mode Multiply, which is the best blending mode for shading. I will subtly add a few extra shadows using an airbrush. My go-to is the medium brush in the airbrushing tab in PROCREATE, and only on the edges of each section and wherever I originally added the base shadows before. Once you have covered all of the areas necessary, I like to make this a little more vibrant, so I duplicate that shadow layer and change the blending mode to soft light. This blending mode will enhance the shadows into a richer color. However, it was too much of a bright purple now, so I played with the saturation of that layer, lowering the saturation so that it's less vibrant purple and more of a darker blue. So now all that is left to do is play with the opacities of both layers. If you want darker shadows, increase the opacity of the multiply layer. If you want richer shadows, increase the soft light layer. For these, I wanted a vibrant, warm coloring, so I set the multiply layer's opacity around 20% and the soft light layer around 80%. Also feel free to erase a little bit of the multiply layer to create a good gradient of shadows, so the shading transitions smoothly across the base colors and the shading. Alright, now that that complicated bonus step is over, we can move on to the highlights, my favorite step. This is what truly brings all of my manga colorings to life, my ultimate technique. For this, create a new layer above all layers and select the blending mode Add. Do not use the light pen on the luminance tab. This makes the highlights look very tacky because that pen is literally made for neon lights and lightning bolts, not for highlighting. To make the highlights look natural, you need to use an airbrush, and the trick is to draw very thin strokes on the edges, especially where the shadows are, to really create that contrast. And then with a bigger brush size, you can add a bit of a shine on the lighter parts of the colors. This makes the coloring look so crisp and three-dimensional, and it's what really will make your manga coloring stand out. I often see a lot of manga colorings that do not have this crispy shine, and it really kills the entire effort put into coloring and shading. There cannot be shadows if there is no light. Remember that. See how stunning it looks? Compare with and without. Simply beautiful. Do this on your colorings and you'll be surprised at how much difference it can make. Okay, now the final step, the background. Now, I'm gonna be real with you. I have no idea what I want to do. This always happens when doing backgrounds. I will change it at least 3 times before I even decide on basically the color scheme. So I knew I wanted a sky background, but definitely did not think a clear blue sky would be fitting with all of the warm colors we just did. So I opted for a sunset vibe. Of course, I realized that there were a couple of spots I missed on the coloring that were seeping through the background, so I went back to color them in. I also realized I left the hair untouched, so I just colored the entire thing black and made my own hair highlights with a gray tone to match her black hair. I typically do this with characters with black hair, just add grayish blue highlights. I moved on to color the cherry blossom petals, adding a pink glow around them to match the aesthetic of her powers. I decided to add a few sunset clouds on the background to fill in the vast space on the background. It was looking too empty and boring with just a gradient color, so feel free to add whatever background elements you deem appropriate to the scene. I also love coloring the impact text on the background of panels, since it adds a pop of vibrant color to every scene. You find these often in manga panels, so it's always a good idea to color them and not leave them black. I draw over the manga panel as we did for the skirt and the top, and always go for a gradient effect. I did again the halftone trick we did on Robin's clothes to add a little bit of texture and comic aesthetic. And definitely always add white outline around them to make it pop even more. It looks so much more colorful. Try to stick with the color palette in the overall drawing, but at the same time one that contrasts the background. It wouldn't look good if we had colored the text with green or blue tones. Okay, one last bonus step for special effects. It's quick and worth it, I promise. I noticed that whenever she sprouts extra limbs, they come with this glowy pink tint on them to differentiate them from her actual limbs. So very simple to achieve that effect. We're going to coat these extra limbs, which are identified as those that do not have the coat sleeves on, with a vibrant pink color. This effect works best with the blending mode screen, since it brightens the area being colored, adopting the color you're using, but in a very sheer and subtle manner. It also makes the liner turn pink in exchange, so it's perfect, 2 steps in one. I duplicated the layer and made the one underneath have the blending mode soft light, just to keep the shaded areas vibrant and dark. And that's it. Now it looks like the extra limbs come from her powers and you can spot them better. I know this tutorial is a little bit more complex than my first one, but I wanted to make sure that I cover all of the new techniques that I use today, since my manga coloring style has evolved significantly for the past 2 years. I made sure to point out the extra steps that are not necessary if you're just starting with manga coloring, but definitely make sure to try them out later once you're more comfortable with it. There are endless things that you can try, and there's really not right or wrong way to color manga. You will slowly start realizing what style fits you better, whether it's a more vibrant color or more gloomy tones, so whatever works for you. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and definitely make sure to check my other tutorials on my channel. Thank you so much for watching.